So I said, okay, well, if this is going to be a virus that is affecting society on a global level, let's do a lot of research on it. And, two of our founding values, I would say, as a business have been do the research, like found everything that we do in research and validation and science, and move at a really fast pace, like move at an uncomfortable pace. I say that a lot. And so that combination set us up well to do research on COVID. And by early March, we had COVID-19 tracking in the Whoop app. We were the first consumer product to have COVID-19 tracking in the Whoop app. In a matter of weeks, we had over 1,000 responses of people saying they had tested positive for COVID-19. By April 1st, we had partnered with research institutions like CQU to actually investigate all of this data. And, we've quickly had one of the largest data sets on physiology alongside COVID-19. And we didn't know what we were going to find, frankly. But we found one thing that really jumps off the page. And it's that if you have an elevated respiratory rate, it can be a predictor of COVID-19. So what does that mean? Well, respiratory rate is the number of breaths that you have in a minute. And we measure it while you're sleeping. Now, the funny thing, Alex, is that we actually have been measuring this statistic for years, and yet we never showed it to users because it was a really boring statistic. And we talk a lot at Whoop about how despite all the data that we collect, we have to show restraint in what you show to someone because, a person can only pay attention to so many things. And so respiratory rate, was something that we hid. It was just something that we were collecting in the background because we thought it was interesting. And what we discovered in looking at COVID-19 patients is that their respiratory rates jumped off the page. Now, COVID-19 is a lower respiratory tract infection. So it makes all the sense in the world that it would affect your breathing. And a typical respiratory rate is somewhere between like 10 and 20 breaths per minute. Now, your respiratory rate practically doesn't change. I'll give you an example. So Nick Watney on the PGA Tour was on Whoop for about 10 months. And as you know, the PGA Tour is back up and running. And this was like maybe 6 weeks ago. And so he gets a 14 every day respiratory rate, 14 for like 10 months. I mean, it never changed. And then he wakes up one morning. So he tests negative on a Tuesday, right? Plays in the tournament on Thursday. And then Friday, he wakes up and his respiratory rate was an 18. So it had been a 14 every day. And then all of a sudden, boom, 18. And he said, he had read the research that we had put out on COVID-19 and respiratory rate. And he went to the doctors and said, I think I should be tested again. They said, actually, you're cleared to play. And fortunately, he was able to get another test. He tested positive. And he was able to withdraw from the PGA Tour event and not infect anyone. And the PGA Tour, has since put Whoop on every single player, caddy, media member, staff. And I think that's the example of the power of respiratory rate. And mind you, Nick never had any symptoms. I mean, even 2 weeks later, he didn't have symptoms. And so it was a pretty amazing story, and it was pretty consistent with the research that we had done and published, which showed that if you have an elevated respiratory rate, it can be a predictor of COVID-19 up to 2 days before you feel symptoms. And we saw in the research that we published, 80% of cases by the third day of symptoms were caught by an elevated respiratory rate.